Hey guys, it's Belle, and in this video we are going to be reading over one of my favorite texts from the ancient and medieval world because it is one of these texts which disproves the common misconception that people have that the distinction between biological sex and gender role or gender identity is purely a construction of the modern era. This text is called the Liber de Physiognomia. Now, this translates to the book about physiognomy, and physiognomy is very crudely the field of study by which you can tell, allegedly, psychological differences in people by observing their physiological characteristics. This is a pseudoscience, it's not real, but it was very popular among medieval and Roman doctors, such as those who wrote textbooks such as this. And the Liber de Physiognomia is extremely interesting on so many levels because it's almost a reverse clocking guide. We think of clocking in the sense of trans politics and trans discourse now as identifying a person's biological sex because of their gender identity, or rather through their gender identity performance. But the Liber de Physiognomia is the other way around. It's saying that even if one is trying to hide their gender identity or their psychological inclinations, their physiological signs can give indications as to what is going on with their mind in regards to gender performance, which is so interesting and fascinating. And I'll be doing a few different tidbits, breaking down particular little bits because there are chapters on lesbians and the gays, like twinks. It's amazing. It is so much fun. And this is one of the very first chapters where they're just defining the terms that they're going to be using in the book in rather good scholastic fashion, I must say, for an ancient text. And with that being said, let's get into it. I will read this through from start to finish, and then we will break it down line by line. So, as usual, you can pause the video and have a go at producing your own translation with the guide on the screen, should you wish, and check it against what I say. So, prima igitur divisio observationis huius atque discretio ea est, ut alterum masculinum genus sit alterum femininum. Quod non ea ratione accipiendum est, qua naturale tel sexus et genera discreta sunt, sed ut plerumque etiam in feminino masculinum genus et in masculino femininum deprendatur. Denique quod masculinum nos dicimus artenicon, quod femininum felicon. Physiognomes dicunt. Primo igitur constituendus est, animus masculini et e contra feminini, deinde corporis utriusque designande indicia sunt, et, si non omnia, ea tamenque viam darve considerationes uiusce possint. Nam sicut in studio literarum cum sint viginti quator elementa secundum Graecos, quibus omnis vox et omnis sermo comprenditur, ita et in physiognomonia propositis elementis latissima observationis uius via panditur. Nam, et si syllabas omnes in prima etate didicimus, concepta vi syllabarum, prod quisque sermo prevenervet, mox et rarum ex quibus consat ordinem previdemus. So, I read that quite quickly because I wanted us to get on to examining the actual sentences itself. So, prima igitur divisio observationis huius. So, therefore, the first division of this observation, so this process of observation where you're looking at somebody and identifying their qualities. Atque discretio ea est, and that discretion or that distinction is, ut alterum masculinum genus sit, that one genus, now we're going to get into what this word in particular means, but it sort of has the meaning of a type, a category, more so than biological sex. Genus can be used in ways which are synonymous with biological sex, but not always. And when it is being used in a manner which is synonymous with biological sex, it is because biological sex is a category, and not because the word genus itself intrinsically refers to the body or to bodily categories, because genus can refer to other kinds of categories, such as differences between ethnicities or different styles of clothing, this kind of thing. Whereas sexus is obviously where we get our word biological sex from, and it's very much corporeal all the time, essentially. So, alterum masculinum genus sit, One shall be a masculine, we'll call this gender for the time being, genus. It is ultimately originally where our word for gender comes from. And do quickly note also with regards to this genus that the YouTube channel Theology of the Body, which is a sort of Catholic YouTube channel and a think tank, I believe, who do, well, the theology of the body, what the founder of that channel, I can't remember his name, has a video about, the meaning of biological sex and the meaning of sexual identity and all this stuff, in which he, I would say, makes an etymological fallacy in that he sort of claims that because the root of this word genus has to do with, he goes on about it, genitals, generation, and stuff like this. It's like, therefore, gender is intrinsically related to biological sex. Now, I would argue that gender in some ways does always have ties to biological sex. I would say that gender roles and identity and performance, they're always inflected for the ego's biological sex, but that's not the same thing as saying that it emerges therefrom or is intrinsically tied to one's biological sex, or it must be determined by it, which this man seems to claim, or rather he seems to claim that in a properly ordered and healthy individual, this is how gender would emerge, which I think is a bit of a fallacious argument. And it ignores the fact, first of all, that Latin has a word for biological sex, which is distinct from the word genus, and it's also ignoring the way that the word genus itself is used in Latin literature, which I maybe ought to do a video using the Corpus Corporum website to fully examine how the word genus is used in Latin literature, because that way I can show rather than simply claiming how it is used in the language. But for now, just take my word for it that the word genus can apply to broader categories rather than to merely the corporeal category of biological sex. So it says that the first division of this observation of physiognomy and the distinction of physiognomy is that one type or gender should be masculine, alterum femininum, the other shall be feminine. And these terms masculinus and femininus, they seem to refer more specifically to biological sex. The word mas and femina referring to biological males and biological females respectively, because there are other terms which we might call man and woman, which are for people who, yes, have to be biologically male or biologically female, but are performing a particular social role in so doing. So, as an example, a vir is the sort of biologically male, active, masculine in terms of gender roles person, whereas there are other mares, other males in Latin literature who are definitely not viri, but who are still mares. So you have Cinedi, for example, which the Book of Physiognomy talks about at length, who are biologically male but are somewhat effeminate in their presentation, and therefore they are not viri, but they are definitely mares. So there is a distinction that we can draw there with this word mas, and likewise with the word femina as well. We see, for instance, the word femineos or femininus being used seemingly to refer to something associated with biologically female people, whereas the word muliebris, coming from the Latin word mulier, meaning a woman, seems to be associated with the things which culturally and socially are associated with biological women, but are not necessarily intrinsic to being a biological woman. So I'll take, for instance, the word femineos aspectus, which we encountered in my video. I believe it's a straight African or a heterosexual African in Visigothic era Portugal, right? That word, femineos aspectus, occurs in this text, and that is because the person who was looking at him, who had the aspectus, which is the sight, was biologically female. There is another word that they could have used for this if they wanted to describe the gaze as feminine or feminizing, which would be muliebris aspectus. That would be entirely grammatically correct, but that wasn't used. And I think that was a deliberate, or that was a sort of meaningful choice, because muliebris would imply that the gaze had something to do with the sort of the cultural meanings around womanhood, which are not the same thing as a gaze which comes from an intrinsically, biologically female person. So there we go. That's the distinction that mas, or the stem mas in Latin, is for biological males and femina for biological females. So we have introduced 3 terms that we need to get to grips with, and the last one is in the next sentence. So let's get on with it. So, quod non ea ratione accipiendum est. That which, or because perhaps, non ea ratione, not by that reckoning, by that reason, accipiendum est, is it to be accepted. Qua. Now this qua is an ablative and it goes with ea ratione. So because it is not to be accepted according to that reason by which naturaliter sexus et genera discreta sunt. Sex and sexes and genders are discreta, they are discrete. And notice we have the same word or a similar word up here, discretio. So this, what it is saying is that the first division and distinction you need to make in the art of physiognomy is there is one masculine gender and another feminine gender. And then the text goes on to say, you should not accept the argument according to which naturally the sexes and the genders are distinct, they are different. And this is why I always love to bust out this text as almost proof that the ancient Romans had some kind of concept of gender, which is distinct from biological sex, because the Book of Physiognomy would not need to make this argument saying, do not accept this belief that sex and gender are discrete, if a certain number of people in Greco-Roman times weren't believing it. And I think the fact that we have in many such texts references, for instance, to men who liked muliebria, which are like womanly things, or, you know, the Roman poet Martial described male passive homosexual activity as muliebria parti, to suffer womanly things. There is clearly an association in Latin literature of things which are filling a role which we would now call gender, as distinct from things that are associated with the biological sexes of male and female. But this text, the Book of Physiognomy, is actually arguing against this distinction. It said you should not accept that argument by which the sexes and genders are distinct, because sedut plerunque etiam. But indeed, in the most of the time, in feminino masculinum genus, et in masculino femininum deprendatur. So, in feminino et in masculino. What do these mean? Well, because we have sexus genera up here, these are adjectives, right? Feminino, masculino. There's actually no noun that's going to go with these. But because we have sexus and genera up here, and then we have genus down here, I think what this is that in a feminine sex, so in a person of the feminine sex, and in the masculine sex, we have a masculine gender and a feminine gender. That's my guess as to what these words are meaning. So we should not accept it according to that argument by which sex and gender are naturally distinct. But most of the time, in a feminine body or a feminine sex, a masculine gender, deprendatur, it may be apprehended, it may be realized, basically. It could be perceived, I would say clocked. Most of the time, a masculine gender in a feminine body can be clocked. And in a masculine body, in a masculine sex, a feminine gender can be identified, it can be clocked. Denique, quod masculinum nos dicimus arthenikon. And there, then indeed, that which we call the masculine gender, or the masculine sex, I should say, arthenikon, which is the Greek word for biologically male. Physiognomones dicunt, the physiognomers call it. We got a few Greek words coming in here because this text is definitely coming from the Hellenic part of the Roman world. Quod femininum thelukon, and that which is feminine we call thelukon. Now, my suspicion with this, with a comparatively limited knowledge of Greek, is that these terms are referring to the sexes, not to the genders, because thelux, I believe, is the Greek word for breast, whence this ultimately derives. So this is a more specific reference to the body, even though there are Greek words such as gynaika, which could refer to woman in a sense more closely corresponding to something like the Latin mulier, for instance. So I'm tentatively going to say that the words arthenikon and thelikon here are referring to biological sex and not to gender. So what it's saying is that you should not accept the argument that sex and gender are distinct, because most of the time you can recognize a masculine gender in a feminine body and a feminine gender in a masculine body from the way that that body looks, essentially. And because you can tell from the way the body looks, that is why there is only like a masculine type and a feminine type. And that's why you shouldn't accept the argument that they're different, because you can tell one from the other by looking at the body. That's the argument that this text is making. This is literally the sort of turf argument that we can always tell, but from about 2,000 years ago, because discourse, particularly gender discourse, apparently literally never changes and never updates. I will be charmed to hear AGP discourse is still happening in the year 3000 AD. Oh God. Buckle in, everyone, buckle in. So, onwards with the Latin. Primo editor constituendus est animus masculini et e contra feminini. Okay. First of all, therefore, constituendus est animus masculini et e contra feminini. The rational mind, the animus, this is distinct mind from the anima, which refers to the spirit or the breath or the life. So this is the rational mind, the thinking mind. Constituendus est was formed or was constituted masculini et e contra feminini. So the brain was created first as male or female. Dein ne corporis triusque designanda indicia sunt. So, and then the the signs of the body, designanda indicia, are to be pointed out, corporis utriusque, of each body. So what this is saying is that the physiognomer's first job is to determine, constituendus est, it should be constituted, it should be determined, the soul of a masculine person and on the other of a female person. So this is very interesting. It's sort of saying that we are identifying something relating to gender, because one type is going to be a masculinum genus, one is going to be a masculine gender, the other is going to be a feminine gender. And the task of the physiognomer is to identify these and not to simply believe that sex and gender are naturally separate, but to treat them as the same, and therefore to identify the signs of a deviant gender identity through the deviances in a person's biological sex, so in the manifestations of their sex body. So, first of all, a physiognomer should determine whether the rational mind is masculine or feminine, and then the signs of each person's body are to be designated, et si non omnia, if not all of these signs, ea tamen que, those, however, which viam dare considerationis uiusce possint, those signs are to be designated which can, viam dare means sort of point the way, considerationis uiusce, of this consideration. So this is actually a very interesting point, because it's saying that it's acknowledging that not all of the signs that they're going to go on to list for how to identify, let's say, a feminine gender in a male body, not all of the physical signs of the body are going to be there, but you may have just about enough that can give you a hint that this is what's going on with the person. It's fascinating, and to be slightly fair to them, this also does concord with certain features of the body, because with the exception of bones like the pelvis and I believe the cranium as well, generally a human skeleton actually exists on a spectrum. We don't say in archaeology from masculinity to femininity, but we say from robusticity, which refers to the sort of the thickness and the sort of length of one's bones, to gracility, which is the inverse of that, so the relative thinness of one's bones, the density, and also to the comparative length, because humans are of course sexually dimorphic, but it's on a spectrum. And what it's saying here is that you may have some signs because some elements of that spectrum may be more robust or more gracile than others, say on the skeleton, but you will have enough, basically, enough signs to tell the sex that can give you a path to go for this consideration. Absolutely fascinating stuff. Nam sicut in studio literarum, cum sint viginti quatuor elementa secundum Grecos. So, for just as in the study of letters, nam sicut in studio literarum, cum sint viginti quatuor elementa secundum Grecos, where there are 24 elements according to the Greeks, quibus omnis vox et omnis sermo comprenditur, by which every voice and every language is understood. Ita et in physiognomonia. What a word, physiognomonia. Who wrote that? Ita et in physiognomonia propositis elementis latissima observationis uis via panditur. So thus also in physiognomonia, latissima via, the broadest path, panditur, is extended observationis huius. So the broadest path of this observation, observationis huius, is extended propositis elementis, by the elements which we are proposing here, essentially. Nam et si syllabus omnes in prima etate didicimus, for if indeed didicimus, we have learned all syllabus omnes in prima etate, in our first age, concepta vi syllabarum, having grasped the power of the syllables, or one capacity for these syllables, prod quisque sermo provenerit, whence every language derives, mox literarum ex quibus constat ordinem previdemus. So soon we shall perceive, we will recognize the order of the letters, ordinem literarum previdemus, we will perceive the order of the letters ex quibus constat, from which, and then we need a nominative noun to go with constat, and I believe this is quisque sermo. So what this means is, the syntax is a bit complicated, but it means we will see the order of the letters from which every language consists, or in which every language consists. I hope that is making sense, or the order of the letters from which each language consists. So that has been a journey from start to finish, and because this is a, I guess, rather topical text, I guess I will really quickly go from start to finish and give you a reading of it and explain again what this text is saying, just in English. So, therefore, the first division of this observation and the distinction is that one gender shall be masculine and the other shall be feminine, because it is not to be accepted according to that argument by which sexes and gender are naturally distinct, because indeed, in most of the cases, a feminine gender can be identified in a masculine body and a masculine gender in a feminine body. And then, that which we call the masculine sex, the Greeks call, or the Greek physiognomons call arsenikon, and that which we call the feminine sex, they call the thelikon. First of all, therefore, the rational mind of a masculine person or of a feminine person is to be decided, of a biologically male or biologically female person is to be decided. And then the signs of each one's body are to be indicated, and even if you don't have all of them, you will have enough signs which can give you some direction for this consideration. For just as in the study of letters, when there are 24 elements according to the Greeks, by which every voice in every language is understood, thus also in physiognomy, the broadest path of this observation is extended by the element which we have proposed here. For if indeed we have learned all of our syllables in our youth, having grasped the power of these syllables, soon, from which every language advances, soon we will perceive the order of those letters from which all language consists. Whew. So, that was complicated, and now you know you have the Middle English language seal of approval, and you can use this, if you'll forgive it, the phrase, as a clobber passage to go and bash people over the head with, because whenever people love to go, oh, the ancients had no concept of gender theory, I just love to throw this at them and like, this sentence is indisputable proof that at least some Romans had a concept of gender which was distinct from biological sex. This sentence here from quod all the way to deprehendatur, and I just love throwing that in people's faces and watching them get so mad about it, and hopefully now you can do the same. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you want me to teach you Latin or any of the other languages that I do here on this channel, you can subscribe to my Patreon, which will be linked in the description of this video. You can also join my Discord server, where I often post these screenshots and these glosses before I turn them into videos, so you'll get early access to them. And until next time, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a nice day. Bye everyone!